So why did these white Europeans choose black people to enslave? Because their physical differences from whites made it easier to create lies that they were biologically inferior. They invented science to defend this. It was easier to make these people who looked so different from us less human. And that lie made it easier to justify torture, rape, family separation, and death on a massive scale.
Grand Rising Kings and Queens, welcome back to my YouTube channel. All of you from Africa and across the ocean, you are welcome to my YouTube space. Make sure you subscribe, you like and share. Now I am in somewhere in the midst of Lake Victoria. If you have think of it, or if you have ever heard of Lake Victoria from Kenya, this is Lake Victoria. Now there is a white woman recently came out and told the truth many of black people knows about it. This truth is that it's about why white people chose black people to be slaves. I was asking this question to myself. Why not Latinos? Why not Chinese? Why not Indians? Why only black people? But I discovered this. Because this white lady too came out with this truth, and that's what I'm going to talk about in this video. Okay? Now, before we dive deep into this video, I want you to watch this clip first, and then we continue.
I am trying to get real with myself and with other white people, and it is painful work. There's a whole lot of blame toward black people for being the cause of how white people treat them, and I'm trying to get to the bottom of that. I decided to take a closer look at slavery, since that's such a big topic in the United States. There has been slavery all over the world forever, and all colors of people have enslaved other colors of people for as long as we know about. But the transatlantic slave trade, in which Europeans brought African and Caribbean black people to the United States to be free labor in the new colonies before they were really the United States, is a whole different story of slavery. Slavery historically had to do with who won and who lost a war, who was convenient, who stumbled by at the wrong time, and so it wasn't specifically race-based. So why did these white Europeans choose black people to enslave? Because their physical differences from whites made it easier to create lies that they were biologically inferior. They invented science to defend this. It was easier to make these people who looked so different from us less human. And that lie made it easier to justify torture, rape, family separation, and death on a massive scale. And it made them, quite frankly, easier to identify if they tried to escape. The legacy didn't disappear when slavery ended. Eugenics came along and fed the racial superiority notion of whiteness, and it influenced the Nazi narrative along with the racial one. It carried over into segregation, Jim Crow, housing, policing, incarceration, education, all of that. If we're ever going to fix what's broken, we need to get curious enough to name how it got broken in the first place. White people need to get curious so we can say no more, not on my watch. It was 1607 when English settlers were sent by the Virginia Company of England to found Jamestown in Virginia, the first colony in the Americas. The goal of the Virginia Company was to get rich. The settlers had their own agendas like religious freedom and escaping tyranny, but the Virginia Company was their ride. 12 years later, in 1619, the first ship carrying African slaves got there. That was no coincidence. That was 1600's prime delivery, a gift from the Virginia Company. They had been watching Spain and Portugal profit from enslaved Africans for many years, since the 1400s, and they swiped their business model. They also used indentured servants. Some of my ancestors were indentured servants. But there's some disagreement about whether the African slaves were originally indentured, but it didn't really matter because they ended up being chattel. White indentured servants had contracts, and they had a shot at freedom after 4 to 7 years usually. When their time was up, they often got land or goods to help them start fresh. Black Africans were enslaved for life, and to ensure that they stayed that way, the colonists made laws about it. If your mama was a slave, you were a slave, your kids were slaves. There really wasn't a way out. But that was the plan all along, because think of the business aspects of it. Once you bought a person, you never had to buy them again. You never had to pay them except to keep them fed well enough that they didn't die. And you could breed them. It's disgusting. To make people feel okay about all this, language became peppered with things like, they're childlike and they need our guidance. Does that ring a bell with anything you might hear today? Like, they just need more discipline at home. They need stronger role models. It's all victim blaming, dog whistles, gaslighting, and it's still part of the culture. And it carries down from way the hell back then. The colonists passed laws to make sure slaves did not learn to read because an educated slave was bad for business. Fast forward to Reagan's trickle-down economics theory. That never worked when it came to wealth. The rich just hoarded their money. But racism trickles. It always has. And it can be so effective that white people don't recognize it as racism because we aren't looking for it. We're too comfortable. Get curious and follow for episode 3, when race became law, the unnatural birth of whiteness. I've never owned anyone. My neighbors, as far as I know, have never been owned by anyone. But the people who say we don't owe any reparations for the Civil War are ignoring something really huge. Or maybe they just don't know. Some people already got reparations. White people. White enslavers were paid for losing their human property. The actual people who were raped, tortured, whipped, and sold, and worse, were promised land to get a fresh start after the war, but they got nothing. When slavery was abolished, Congress paid nearly $1 million, which is 30 million in today's bucks, to white enslavers as compensation for losing their property in a war they lost. If a freed person didn't hit the road fast enough, they risked being re-enslaved under new laws that were just workarounds for all these white people losing their slaves. After the Civil War ended, Union General Sherman set aside 400,000 acres of confiscated Confederate land for black families to start new lives on. Up to 40 acres each. The Army loaned out mules to help them work the land. That's where the phrase 40 acres and a mule comes from. Black people were already working some of this land when Lincoln was assassinated and Andrew Johnson became president. Well, Johnson reversed the order. He gave the land back to the same Confederates who had just tried to destroy the country. The freed people were evicted. So they made all these things into crimes that were non-crimes. They were things like, if a black person didn't have a job, that was a crime. If a black person couldn't prove that they had a job, that was a crime. You could get arrested for that and a lot of other ridiculous things. But once you were in jail, you could be leased out as labor for private profit. This system of convict leasing allowed white landowners and businesses to replace slavery with something just as violent, just as profitable as slavery. No wonder there are still Confederate flags all across the South. Even after slavery was abolished, black Americans were not safe. Public lynchings became a regular threat. They were a form of terror used to keep free people in their place. They were planned events announced in advance so everybody could attend. They were held in broad daylight. White families brought their children to watch black people being hanged, tortured, brutally, brutally murdered. It was a festival. People sold food. There were postcards made. People could buy postcards of the mutilated bodies hanging from trees and mail them in the mail or keep them as souvenirs. This country took care of Civil War criminals and punished the ones the war was supposed to free. And there was a lot more abuse I just can't fit into this video. Next time I'm going to talk about the stuff that happened in relation to the Great Depression and World War II. And then after that, I'll have one on civil rights, the era when I was growing up, how it all ties in to the racism that is part and parcel of our grand land today. White people, you especially need to get curious. Join me in this research, and you'll find that people are willing and able to come in with their education and their experience to help you learn. You just have to be open to it. We need to...
Welcome back. There is a lie that white people told us. They told us that we were chosen for slavery because we were inferior, because we couldn't read, because we were tribal, because we were savage. But let me tell you, this was all a lie. This was all a lie, a manufactured story to cover up the truth. And what they don't want you to know is that before slavery, Africa had the most advanced civilization in the world. We had kingdoms, we had kings, we had queens, we had empires. For example, we had mathematicians, we had mathematics, we had medicine, we had gold and empires that Europe have never even imagined. For example, we had Timbuktu, we had Ethiopia. Ethiopia was undefeated by the colonizer. We had Mali Empire, the Songhai Empire, Great Zimbabwe. Like, Africa was thriving. But here is the problem. When you are building a new system of domination, that's a white empire, you can't have powerful black nations standing tall. So they created a system of lies, and slavery was the engine that built their empire. Now, why black people? Why not the other races? Why black people? This is the question that all of us have been asking ourselves. Let's get there straight. Europeans didn't just stumble upon black people. Okay? They didn't just get to black people and say, oh, let's enslave them. No, this was strategic. This was strategic. White colonizers tried to enslave indigenous people in America, and many resisted or died in large numbers due to the European diseases. They tried to enslave the poor white people, but those whites couldn't blend in and escape easily. But black people, the reason why it's black people is because we were physically strong, resilient in tropical climate, deeply spiritual, and visually distinguished. We couldn't blend in, or we could not disappear easily because we look differently. But most importantly, black people are so much powerful. Okay? We are so much powerful. And that power had to be broken. So Europeans knew if they could psychologically and physically enslave the most powerful people on earth, they could dominate the world. So what they did is that they didn't choose black people because we were weak, or we were weak, or we are weak. They chose black people because we were a threat. We were a threat to the system. Now, one thing is that they did not just randomly grab people off the beach. They worked with corrupted African leaders, European missionaries, and Arab traders to break the unity. And that's why my black Americans brother, they always say, Africans sold us. Africans sold us. That's why a lot of them, they are saying, we ain't brothers. Okay? They use religion to confuse. They use guns and alcohol to bribe and manipulate. They use divide and conquer tactics, turning ethnic groups against each other. And once we were captured, they used trauma. They erased our names. They erased our language. They erased our gods. They turned kings into slaves and made their descendants believe that all they ever were. And that is not weakness. That is war tactics. Okay? Now, Europe built the entire science to justify black environment. You know, they created fake studies and claimed that black people were mark of Cain. They taught generation of white children that Africans were savages. This wasn't just ignorance. This was propaganda, total lie. And they had to justify their actions because deep down, they knew what they were doing. Deep down, they knew very well that black people were not as they say. They knew very well that Africa was not a dark continent. And what made it worse is that they feared our revenge. But black people were never there for revenge. They feared what will happen if black people ever woke up and remember who they are. And that's why black Americans or Africans in diaspora, they had the threat to the system because they fear the unity of black Americans and Caribbeans and Africans. Why? Because they fear that we will know the truth about ourselves. We will know who we are. And when we know who we are, maybe we can revolt. So let's stop acting like slavery was a moral failure. Slavery was a business. And the black body was the most valuable economic tool on the earth for 400 years. Now, they didn't choose black people to help us. No, they used us like machines. They could not break our souls. Even in chains, black people resisted. Even under whips, black people continued to sing. Even when while stolen, we survived. And that survival is a proof of something divine. Now, I want to talk about the white woman who has finally come out and said it. I know a lot of us have been knowing about this, and but she admitted what so many have been afraid to say, that it wasn't about weakness. It was about fear. It was about control. It was about silencing people who had the power to change the world. And the confession matters a lot. And we need more white people to confess like this. Because when truth comes from the oppressor's own mouth, it forces the world to listen. And now the world is listening to this truth. But we didn't need to know the truth because we always knew the truth. It's just, it is never spoken out here. Slavery may have ended legally, but the system never stopped. It just evolved. They just changed clothes from Jim Crow, because the Jim Crow law or the Jim Crow replaced the chains. The prison system replaced plantations. The school system erased our real history as black people. And still, they keep choosing black bodies to exploit. From music to sport, to fashion, to social media. You know, black culture runs the world. And I've been talking about this for so long. Black culture is one of the most biggest culture, one of the most influential culture in the world. When you talk about music, it's black music that's paying. Hip-hop, rock and roll, R&B, name all of these type. The world is listening to the Afrobeats. The world is listening to, we call it the South African music. The world is about black people. Now, the truth is, they didn't choose black people because we were slaves, okay? They chose black people because we were gods. Because we built pyramids without cranes. Imagine pyramids in Egypt was built without using of modern cranes and everything, you know? They choose black people because we healed with herbs from before Western medicine. They choose black people because we birthed civilization. They chose us. They chose us because we held the light of humanity before they even knew how to build a fire. And now the truth is coming back. That's why they panic when we unite, when we reclaim our history, when we love our skin, when we build our own. Because they know the moment black people truly wake up, it's over. And that's why they don't want us to unite. So family, I want to say this. Black people never sit down and start imagining that you are a slave and you feel bad about yourself. No. They choose us because we were powerful. That's one thing you need to know. They choose us because we are still powerful. And the power is still in us. But it's been buried under centuries of lies. Now it is time to dig it up. It is time to reclaim it. It is time to heal. It is time to rise. Don't wait for the apology. Don't wait for their textbook to change. We are the living proof of survival, brilliance, and revolution. And when you see a lot of youths revolting, others from Kenya, when you see the youth taking positions in Burkina Faso, when you see the youth, they are just engaging into modern things, you know. So we need to stand as black people. Okay, tell me what you think on the comments about this video. I think you have enjoyed the view and everything. Okay, until next episode, peace out.